Today's guest, Justin Giaffrida, is the co-founder of Citizens Coffee. From bootstrapping his first location in Manhattan to building a hospitality-driven culture obsessed with people, systems, and unforgettable guest experiences, Justin breaks down what it really takes to scale without losing your soul. If you care about leadership, culture, profitability, and building a brand people rave about, this episode is packed with real-world lessons you can use immediately. Stay tuned. Restaurant owners and general managers, your biggest challenges are labor and shrinking margins. Both kill your profit. I help restaurants find and fix those leaks. Last year, I uncovered over $300,000 in lost profit in 2 independent restaurants and $885,000 in a 5-location pizza chain. I specialize in controlling costs to maximize profit, training managers to become leaders, training front of house staff to sell, and marketing that drives trackable, new, and repeat business. If you want more profit, less hours, and a dream team staff in your restaurant, book a free 30-minute profit strategy session with me. Email roger@restaurantrockstars.com. Ajinomoto is your answer to every busy dinner rush spent deep in the weeds. When hungry customers walk through your door, they expect good food that tastes homemade. But making every dish from scratch cuts into your profit, especially with the cost of ingredients and labor. That's where Ajinomoto Foods comes in. Ajinomoto has a huge catalog of fast, easy-to-prep, frozen Asian products that taste and look homemade. That includes classics like fried rice, dumplings, and onion rings, and new trendy fusion plates like kimchi chicken pot stickers. Choosing Ajinomoto is choosing over 100 years of proven expertise in the food service space. Choose to save time and money in your busy kitchen without compromising on the quality your guests expect. Learn about Ajinomoto at ajinomotofoodservice.com. Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is the Restaurant Rockstars Podcast. So glad you're with us. And Justin, welcome to the show today. You've got such an interesting story.
Thank you so much, Roger. Yeah, really, really great to be here. Look, I'm a fan of the podcast and super excited to be on with you today.
Well, thanks for the kind words. Now, you got a lot going on. You're currently in Austin, but you've got locations in Houston, New York, Austin, and now San Antonio. So you're covering some ground, and you've got something called Citizens Coffee. Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we're always busy and brewing up a bit of a storm here at Citizens. It's been an interesting journey, you know. It's been a journey of growth and different periods of ups and downs. But you know, as you just said, we're in a really interesting part of the growth curve. We're now multi-city, multi-state. You know, the brand has some real interesting momentum, and yeah, just super excited about what comes next for us. So. Yeah, happy to jump in.
You're an operator's operator and you're really hands-on. Can you tell us your founding story and then what makes your company successful?
Yeah, love the way you put that. Operator's operator. So as you've just touched on, I think what makes us such a great team and hopefully what makes us a really great leadership group is that, you know, we come from operations. We've built Citizens from the ground up every step of the way. You know, we haven't come at this from a different industry or external to, you know, the restaurant industry. We've built every layer of, you know, operations, the infrastructure, the marketing from our experience. And I think that alone gives you a really great advantage when you're building a culture of, you know, from a technical place rather than from an external place. I think that sounds so simple, but I think it's, you know, very, very critical to understanding what your teams and your departments go through and how to build those departments. But just to take a step back, Andrew and I are originally born and raised in Australia. You can hear it in my accent. You know, it's obvious that I'm not from here. I get told that a lot.
That's awesome. Keep going.
And so born and raised in Australia. We both grew up in different states. So Andrew comes from Gold Coast. I come from Melbourne. And what's unique about Australia is, you know, and this is, I think, starting to spread globally, is Australia has incredibly rich cafe culture. And it comes from, you know, a little bit of a history lesson here. It comes from the British. You know, we've obviously got British roots. You can hear it in my accent. Yes. And from them, we took, you know, the big breakfast culture. So the baked beans, the eggs, and you know, all the other parts that comes. But we combine that with the Mediterranean immigrants that came to Australia early on, and you know, there you have it. You've got an Australian cafe culture, which is amazing coffee espresso culture with the British roots to it as well. And then on top of that, we have some award-winning chefs, innovation, supply chain that goes into that. So we really take the breakfast segment and concept to the next level, you know. And I think, look, I love an American diner as much as the next person, but you know, I think Australian cafes really take that concept to the next level. And so coming to America, you know, a decade ago, we saw that gap. You know, we saw the need. We saw that the American restaurant industry does so many things incredibly well, but breakfast was a bit of an afterthought here. So we really, you know, introduced Citizens, our first location in New York in 2017. And the idea was to bring chef-driven, better for you supply chain with a great hospitality and guest experience to the breakfast segment. And it took off. Absolutely took off. You know, we opened our first location for a modest $74,000 in New York City, the middle of Chelsea, Manhattan, which I think is
for New York. Yes.
Oh, it's next to unbelievable, that story. And yeah, we did it on a really disciplined budget and managed to get open barely and had a rocking first year of business and kind of built it from there. So that's a little bit about the humble beginnings of Citizens and Andrew and I's partnership.
What were well, you mentioned some stumbling blocks there. What were some of the early challenges where you said, oh, we barely made it, but you made it? Obviously, you were very resourceful and creative, which is very important. But what were some of the early challenges? Do you remember?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love to talk about these because I think you can talk about success all day long, but the journey then and now is full of, you know, mistakes well handled and well learned. And I think when we started, we were quite young. We were, you know, naturally we're at 23, 24 with $74,000 of capital. You are destined to stumble a lot. And so I think where we lacked in, you know, to answer your question, I think we lacked in general experience at that stage. You know, we were still learning how to build a restaurant in a foreign country, then how to manage a restaurant in a foreign country with compliance and cultural things. So I think one of the stumbling blocks early on was experience, and we had to learn on the job quite a bit. One thing that helped us overcome that, Roger, was we understood early on that when you're learning from any position, there should always be a combination of what we call the 70-20-10 rule, which is 70% on the job learning, right? You know, learning from your mistakes, learning on the go. But then we understood that 20% of your learning should come from social avenues like peer-to-peer or peer-to-mentor. And so we sought out some really tremendous mentors along the journey that just absolutely advanced us tremendously. We were willing to put our hands up and say, all right, we have no idea what we're doing when it comes to building a restaurant or this part of the restaurant. And so we just had some really great teachers and mentors around us. And now we've developed incredible relationships with them. And then 10% was more like academic learning. So reading tons of books, going to conferences, all that good stuff. So I think that's probably the biggest one I can point to. We lacked experience. We obviously lacked a ton of capital, but we made it up with how quickly we could learn and recover from those mistakes.
Fantastic. What about competition back then in New York? I mean, you mentioned no one was really doing the breakfast thing well. It's that whole cafe culture that you brought from your home country and everything. You had something unique and different that just stood out in the marketplace. But what's the competition like now? Because coffee is big in this country, and I know you're serving like really chef-driven food too. But you know, coffee shops are hot.
Mhm. Yeah, look, I heard this interesting analogy which will make you laugh that I heard, you know, opening a restaurant or doing business in New York is like playing at Wimbledon every day. You know, you're playing amongst the best players and competition is really fierce in New York City.
For sure.
But I think with that challenge, that also sharpens your skills, you know, really, really intensely because you are playing amongst the best. And naturally, when you're doing that, I think you can rise and learn quite quickly. So look, there is a lot of competition around. There's great coffee in New York City. There's great food and beverage and, you know, brands everywhere you look. But I think what separates us is our sharp, really, really sharp niche focus on breakfast. It's for us, most people look at breakfast like it's, you know, we do, you know, it's like an afterthought. We do great coffee and we do a little bit of breakfast. Or we do great dinner. We're well known for dinner or lunch and we will do brunch on a Saturday. we really flip the script or flip it like a pancake, and we look at it like, well, brunch is our thing, and we want to be known to be the best in class at brunch. So we put everything into it, from product to the experience to the menu. It hits you as soon as you walk into Citizens, the colors, the how fun and funky the menu design is, all the way to the food design. So it's really our sharp focus on wanting to be the best in class at one day part that I think has helped us stand out in New York.
That's focus for sure. And I love the tennis reference because I played a lot of tennis when I was younger. And definitely playing with better players really up leveled my game. So that was a great, reference to the restaurant space. Because true, when you're surrounded by really intense competition, you got to play your best game, but you also got to know what the competition is up to. So
It's true. Yeah. And that is a really cool part. Look, doing business in New York is tough. There's no hiding from that. A lot of great restaurateurs know that. But I also think the city's full of inspiration. I'm not shy to say when I walk around New York, I get incredibly inspired by great brands, great personalities, and really kind of innovative concepts that I see. And I think, it's the standards, but it's also the inspiration that drives us.
so you got more than three locations in Texas, but New York, how often do you get to New York?
I get to New York very often. I'm actually sitting in one of our restaurant offices right now from Chelsea, Manhattan. So I come to New York a couple times a month, and when I'm here, I'm always really focused on really effective time with our leadership team. I do great restaurant visits. Really make sure I'm coaching, developing our leaders here and setting them up for some great success. And then on top of that, we're doing real estate tours and networking for growth opportunities.
So tell me about your leadership team. Did you hand assemble these people to really rock and roll your concepts or what? Where'd you find them and what are they, what's their key role day to day?
It's a really good question. I think one thing that we've learned along the journey is when you go from managing one restaurant to two and then four and then seven, you start to learn that your management focus has to shift away from you internally, and you have to shift your focus onto your team. And that's how you achieve success at scale. When we managed one restaurant, it was a real internal focus. You could manage everything by touch and feel, and your boots on the ground. And a lot of the culture and management is set by you, the operator, because you're in the restaurant. One of the biggest evolutions that Andrew and I have gone through is shifting our energy away from ourselves onto the team and learning how to do that, at great scale. And so that's been a huge key to success. And to your question, yes, we have assembled and handpicked this team one by one because, the management team, especially when you're a young brand, is so important. You have to understand what your culture is, what you and the company value, and then you need to find best in class operators who really believe that too, so that you can all sing the same song. So, I'm super proud to say I play a huge role in management recruiting, all the way from restaurant level management to regional level management, corporate level management. I read books and books and books on great recruiting because I don't think anybody is born a great recruiter, even though some of us think we are. So I've read a ton of books, and that's helped me find a lot more success and consistency in finding A players, and be willing to move when you don't have an A player. That's another thing I learned, Roger. It's like you're defined as much as about moving on folks that maybe don't fit your culture as you are with the people that do, and be willing to understand and assume that role as a leader is really important.
We have that in common. We talk about leadership, we talk about A players, and we talk about recruiting. And those three things go together. And there's so many restaurants out there. I still see it because I travel a lot across the country speaking at different events. And it doesn't matter what city I'm in. And I'm still seeing the now hiring signs and the restaurant windows and on their big signs and all that kind of stuff. And I've always believed that when you put out a sign like that, if you're lucky to get anyone at all, you're getting someone else's C player that didn't work out at their last gig. But when you recruit and you hand pick and hand select the people that are part of your team that'll assimilate your culture, they're going to be on the same page and, pull in the same direction, that That's an A player, but there's also people with great personalities that I would consider B players that are reliable. They take initiative, they make friends with,
Yeah.
care about hospitality, but maybe they never worked in a restaurant before. And that's a B
Yeah.
player that can move up quickly to become an A player. So
Yeah.
thanks for pointing all those things out. I think it's really important to differentiate the recruiting from just trying to get a warm body in the door, because those people bring down morale and they certainly don't do your guests any favors. And in many cases, they
Yeah.
send guests to the competition. So that's awesome.
Mhm.
What would you consider to be the foundational systems to your operation? Like, what do you absolutely rely on for systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we've got so many systems at Citizens that help us scale and operate at success. So I'm just trying to have a think about which one I love the most, or which ones do I think are really critical. I think first and foremost, having a really well defined culture that is really thoughtfully published to your teams is super important. As we're saying between you and I right now, standards and people are huge keys to success. So understanding, what does the brand and the team value, and when you're coaching and you're holding the teams accountable, really kind of coaching through that culture is super important because it helps Justin coach and uphold the standards the same as Roger in a different state or city. So we've worked hard to really define the culture at Citizens, and we publish it in what we call the Southern Cross. We've got, great culture handbooks and tools and graphics posted around all of our staff areas. And we've even got a culture language. We call our teams legends. We call our guests our locals. That's got a bit of an Australian flair to it.
Like what?
And we talk the same language when we talk about, is it the legendary legendary plates and cups part of our culture that we're talking about? Is it the fun part of our culture? Is it the wow hospitality part? So we're really specific around well defined, consistent singing that same song, and then eventually I think managers understand how to be consistent in their decision making and their standards from city to city, state to state. That's a really important one. I think another tool that's been a game changer for us, Roger, this is going to be a simple one. We developed what we call a manager's cadence card, and I'd love to tell you about that.
Dude,
So
that sounds interesting.
yeah, so I think we thought, we've got a famous saying at Citizens, which is if you offered me a bag of gold or a best in class general manager, we'd take the general manager all day long. And so I think what that saying tells you is that finding great talent is one thing. Finding amazing managers, general managers who can lead, set the tone for your restaurant, that touches your guests, that touches your team, it's one of the most important position, if not the most important position in the brand. So we developed this manager's cadence card that helps the manager plan and stay structured in their day, where I have to be, what are some of the key tasks that I need to get completed today, and how much time I should take. And so it really maps out a manager's Monday, maps out their Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday, and keeps you on track, on what's core to your role in that day. Because as you know, managers, there's 101 distractions that come, whether it's, a team member with a conversation or a little pipe that's burst over there. Or so I think this tool has been just so effective for us in helping us stay on task, on track to really deliver all the key results, and deliver all those little tasks that amount to a successful restaurant and successful KPIs. So manager cadence card has been a really big one for us.
What if your POS did more than ring up orders? What if it actually ran your restaurant? Touch Bistro is an all in one cloud based POS and restaurant management system designed exclusively for restaurants. They help you run smarter, faster, and more profitably. Touch Bistro brings front of house, back of house, and guest engagement into one easy platform. From patented bill splitting and real time inventory to labor, profit tracking, loyalty, online ordering, and reservations, it's all connected. Touch Bistro is built for restaurants and built to perform. For operators listening in the US or Canada, Touch Bistro is helping restaurants get started for less with savings on upfront costs for a limited time. Terms and conditions apply. Head to touchbistro.com/restaurant rockstars for more details and see how much you can save. Smithfield Culinary is committed to offering your restaurant the perfect protein for every dish at every day part. They know that to meat lovers, a great serving of their favorite cut is more than just food, it's an experience. Take Smithfield's new ready to eat select bacon, where chefs won't leave a mess and your guests won't leave a trace, or the new ground chorizo that lets you serve up tasty smoky heat. Turn to Smithfield for the broadest portfolio of pork, such as bacon, ham, sausage, and more. When you partner with Smithfield, you serve what you love, and your guests will love what you serve. I taste Smithfield products at many restaurant shows, and they're always delicious. To order or more information, go to smithfieldculinary.com/Smithfield. I like that a lot. That's really fantastic. Now, in the begin, how old is the concept? First of all, how long you been doing this?
So we're about 8 years old. So we've had a few years under our belt, and we're now really starting to find momentum.
So you wore all the hats in the beginning and you did it all, everything from operations to marketing to finance to investor relations. And we'll get into some of that. Are you still actively involved every single day in the concept? Like that's your thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I think we are very, from my position as a CEO, director of operations level at our size, I'm still very, very involved in the day-to-day management team. So, I think a big part of my job beyond what I would consider our mothership, our mothership is what we call our corporate team. But when I'm not in my mothership duties, then I'm really focused on great restaurant visits with my GMs, AGMs, district managers. And really that's around, visiting their restaurants, aligning on what I see versus what they see, and really aligning our standards and helping develop and coach them to really run great restaurants in great markets. So that's a big part of what I do today. And you go into those visits really with the goal of picking out 3 to 5 things that we could be doing better, and also, being really, really lavish in the things that we're doing well. So it comes with a lot of structure. But I think in the end, it amounts to your management team really leveling up and aligning on what's important.
Yeah, your leaders probably have a day-to-day finger on the pulse of what I'm going to ask you next, but you have the 30,000-foot view and you can probably answer this question. But when I travel a lot and I speak to restaurants, I constantly hear, about accountability and why don't people show up on time and why do they call in sick and we need them more than they need us. And it's like people are struggling with this labor thing. And part of that is recruiting the right people. But still, there's a lot of young people in this business. They're going to use this as a stepping stone to go somewhere else. They don't necessarily
Mhm.
see a career. And, accountability is so important to performance, to guest satisfaction, to teamwork, all those things. How do your teams, keep your recruits or your frontline staff accountable to goals and game improvement every single day? Is there an easy answer to that, or is it a bigger question?
I think it's probably the most important question that you're answering. It's like, how do you establish a culture of standards and coaching? That's
Yeah,
what I hear you are is what I hear you asking.
yeah, for sure.
Roger, you and I don't think any restaurant leader are never going to change the nature of the restaurant industry. It's always going to have, a sense of transient, labor force, and that's a part of our industry, and that's okay. I think what we can control, and I use control as the key word as operators, is what we deem as our culture. And for us at Citizens, consistency, showing up for your teammates and your guests is a part of our culture and standards. And so, you know, we're never going to get, in the recruitment process, how can you really vet for that, right? You're gonna do your best with simple, some of your interview processes, some of your referencing, but you're not going to get. There's no such thing as getting 100% of your interviews correct. The statistics that I've read is if you're a best in class recruiter, you're more hovering at the 70% success rate, right? So that would say that, we're getting 5 to 7 out of 10 recruits right. Now, what that means is that we have a job to do as great restaurant leaders, that when we start to assess that, one of our legends is, we're not really bought into our culture, our standards. well, what's our job in that process? Our job is to really uphold and coach our standards. And so we really believe in a big part of our culture is what we call legendary learning. Under legendary learning comes a lot of coaching and what we call constant gentle pressure, which is from a restaurateur that I'm sure you know. And
Cool.
I think with that comes a responsibility to, always assess how to coach C players into B or A players and B players to A players, as you put it, but also just when to really deem when you've got somebody that, doesn't really want to be there or is not really a fit with your standards or your culture and making those hard decisions, but always giving people the opportunity to improve, I think is key. And so I think what all that amounts to, Roger, that's a daily and that's an everyday task for great restaurant managers. But I think what that accounts to is when you're doing that well, you typically see the whole team moving in one direction, right? And we're all showing up for our guests. We're all following our processes. We're giving great hospitality. We're showing up for each other. And so when those moments arise where, a team member either, kind of falls into a place where they no longer fit that culture or we've mishired somebody, it's easier to recognize because your culture is so strong, your standards are so strong. It's much easier to recognize when you've got one or two outliers or, who you're focused on with your coaching, when your culture illuminates that for you. So for me, it always goes back to culture and standards.
That's funny because that happened in my restaurants where I built these, what I call dream teams, right? And every now and again, there was someone like you said that just doesn't quite fit, didn't really want to be there, and somehow got past the hiring process. 'Cause sometimes people can tell you in an interview exactly what they think you want to hear. They can present themselves really well, and then they get there and it's like, this isn't what I expected, kind of thing, right? And we always gave people a chance, but when we recognized that, you'd give them another chance, but after a while, it's like the team kind of voted those people off the island, and those just knew I didn't fit, and we didn't have to fire people anymore. It's like they just left because, like you said, the culture was so strong. You have the dream team people that just say, this is not working for us. And, it just doesn't work. So we used to call that weeding the garden, you know?
I love that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I talk about it, the kind of team going in one direction and you're saying weeding the garden, but I think it's all about culture, right?
We're so like-minded. With that said, you have a term that you use, hospitality centric, right? You're very hospitality centric in your business. Let's talk about what that means and how you achieve that.
Yeah, I love that one. Well, the way in our cultural language, we call that wow hospitality at Citizens. And wow hospitality, it starts from within. So it starts with how we treat each other, all the way from the mothership team to our restaurant level teams. And so we believe in hospitality both externally to our locals, but also internally with each other into our legends. And so we first start with recruitment. We really always bake into our interview process, you know, finding and interviewing all levels of hospitality. And that comes through some great questions and kind of, asking folks to, explain back to us what is great hospitality, when have you witnessed that? And then really giving them a chance in restaurant level trails to show us their hospitality in a structured environment. So, it starts from the interview process, it starts internally within our teams. And then really how we start to promote it is we really focus on a lot of coaching and standards around hospitality. For us, hospitality is not just a nice to have, it's one of our standards at Citizens. And if you buy into that, awesome.
Yeah.
We're here and that's what we believe in. If that's not for you, then, again, that's our culture speaking up, right? But we first start with training wow hospitality, within the initial training and ongoing training. We talk about, what is hospitality versus service and how we want to get away from being order takers and robotic and overlay some of our personal flair into that. We also train and coach on what we call, turning over the rocks and connecting the dots and opening up our guests. So we've got some really great training materials that help our legends understand how to ask and pick up the simple signals in the dining room or with our guests that really start to understand, well, what's Roger here for today? Is Roger sitting down in the restaurant? He's got his AirPods in, his earphones in. And, he's really just looking to kind of have a good time, in a calm moment for himself and have a nice nourishing meal and kind of be on his way quickly? Or is Roger showing us different signals? Is Roger looking around the restaurant, super open to conversation? And then that way we're gonna ask kind of open-ended questions to say, hey, Roger, where are you coming from today? Or, what are you celebrating today? And get a sense of who you are and what kind of experience you're looking for. And then once we can understand some of those cues, we can personalize that experience to really deliver you some really, 5-star experience at Citizens. Some of my favorite stories are, I think last week we actually had we had some visitors visiting us from out of town, and they were really stressed about making it to their flight on time. So they gave us the time they needed to be out by. We were really, really our teams were on the ball to make sure they got their food, their drinks on time, they had a great experience. And actually, as they were paying their check, one of our team members went and hailed a cab for them outside, waiting for them to jump right into their cab. And
Awesome. Yes.
I think about that, and I think about, like, that's just so personalized and so genuine and sincere. And I love that story. So it's a lot more versions of that. Is picking up, hey, did you just move to the neighborhood, Roger? He's a Citizens card that tells you our top 15 spots to visit in the neighborhood that we love at Citizens. Or, hey, Roger, you're visiting today and you plan on going and visiting the Empire State or the High Line in New York. Here's a couple of croissants to go. We know you're going to get hungry on your journey. So it's little things like that I think make people really kind of stand up and feel valued at our restaurant.
You mentioned you did a lot of reading when you were, and maybe you still do, about hospitality and about operations and all the things that make you guys great. And what you just said is obviously mirrored in that famous book, Unreasonable Hospitality, where you do things that guests just can't believe you did. And it's unexpected, but it's such a value add. Like, I can't believe that happened. And that memory lasts forever. So hailing a cab is huge, right? And having that cab ready and really making sure that those people make it to the airport on time. But it also touches on communicating and reading your tables and understanding, are people here for a leisurely experience, or do they have to catch a show? Do they have to be somewhere? And that interaction and conversation, with each guest is so important. And that's just one more piece of hospitality. So bringing up a lot of things that are totally near and dear to my heart. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about finances. Maybe you're involved in this from a big picture standpoint. Maybe you've got someone that's doing all your CFO type work. But what are the key performance indicators you guys watch, and how do you keep your costs in line and maximize your profits?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is a great skill set that I think I've brought forward into my career. I was fortunate enough to study accounting and finance in school, and I really have a sharp focus on that as a restaurateur. Alongside all my restaurant experience, I really look back and value my accounting days. When I run the business. So I think for us, we live by the saying, what gets measured gets managed at Citizens.
Yes.
And
Wonderful.
what are some of the key things that we manage on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis? Well, people think about restaurants and assume that our biggest cost is our rent cost, and that's just simply not true. I think the biggest cost on our P&Ls is our labor, and labor is incredibly controllable. And so that's one of the key pieces that we develop a lot of tools and focus around. So we have labor budgets at Citizens on a quarterly basis, and we reassess some of those budgets. The budgets are very unique to that restaurant's location, and we of course tie great incentives to those labor budgets for our managers. So it aligns the business with the management teams to achieve their quarterly labor goals. Now, it's one thing setting the goal, but part of our job is to help our teams achieve those goals. So we put a lot of focus on developing labor control tools to help our managers go and achieve their bonus. And some of the key tools I'd love to talk about is we have tools that help us be proactive and planning about labor. So, on a week-to-week basis, these are fundamentals, but really developing your schedules 4 weeks in advance, looking at your local areas, events calendar, to understand what are some of the key drivers that are going to affect your sales. and then some more macro level pieces like weather and things that are uncontrollable. But looking ahead 4 weeks and setting a plan and projecting your sales is absolutely key to success in terms of achieving your labor. One of the great parts about restaurants is the predictability in finding your sales. I think once you find your model, we can typically project our sales within 10% on a week-to-week basis within our quarter. And so we look forward, make great schedules that are in line with our budget and our sales. So that's the proactive part of what we do. And then the reactive part of managing our sales, managing our budget is always going to be kind of what we call the labor gauge and the labor phasing. So it's on a day-to-day plan, being reactive in what could change and kind of reacting and managing your labor costs through those changes in the day. So those two things, being proactive and reactive, help us achieve our labor goals as citizens. And look, beyond that, we're really, really focused on our cost of goods sold. We've implemented a really great A versus T system, which helps us control, what's our theoretical food cost. And when we have issues within our food costs, we can really zoom in on where the problems are. Is it a bacon? Is there a bacon problem? Is there, do we have some wastage in our eggs? Are we over portioning our eggs, or we're having a lot of overcooked eggs? So, and the A versus T, I think, is absolutely critical as well. And then we have largely budgets on a lot of the controllables in our restaurants. And again, always tying incentives and great tools and coaching to help our managers achieve those KPIs.
Excellent advice. Now, you've been in business 8 years, but it wasn't that long ago that eggs spiked through the roof like you wouldn't believe. Did you have to drop eggs off your menu? How did you react to that?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think first of all, we try to understand where some of the cost drivers come from on our plate. So we have a weekly meeting with our supply chain to understand what some of the rising costs are. Once we identify a key ingredient, then we have to pull on the levers that we can control. So sometimes it's going to be, we're either going to change the proportions of the dish. We're going to lessen the amount of scrambled eggs, the amount of ounces in our scrambled egg mix to really be able to kind of, absorb some of that cost and not pass on the cost to our customer. Or sometimes it's going to be, changing our menu kind of periodically to put forward more of a sustainable or economical menu to our guests. And then sometimes, you can pull on the price lever as well. So look, it all depends. In the case of the eggs, Roger, we're a breakfast restaurant first and foremost. So I think it's hard to operate breakfast without eggs. And I think sometimes you need to be willing to absorb the cost pressure, from your customer within a reasonable amount of time.
That was the best answer I could have expected. It's all about value.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering that. You've done something really, really interesting. As long as we're on the finance topic, you equity crowdfunded your business and you turned 1,500 customers into owners. Where did that idea come from, and how did it come about, and what have been the results? And it's obviously that it worked for you. It was a win-win.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think this is a new frontier for startup businesses, and restaurants very much included in that category, because traditionally we've had to rely on growth finance through more traditional mediums like banks and then kind of angel investors, and then at a certain point you need to get to institutional level investment, which is private equity and VC. I think equity crowdfunding is this really new, exciting platform that gives great consumer level businesses, or all businesses, but particularly businesses with great communities around them. So that could be your customers, that could be your fans, friends and family that are following you. Equity crowdfunding gives you this really great compliant platform to show the world your product, your brand, and to really show the world what your ambitions are, and really invite people to get on the journey with you and join the ride. And so Citizen, in the early days, we had a lot of great buzz around us, a great community of customers and believers in where we're going and what we're doing. And so we were introduced to equity crowdfunding as a means of growth finance. And we launched our first campaign in 2021. We launched it on a platform called Republic, and we were absolutely shocked. We had over 1,400 investors invest within 4 months of running a campaign. We completely sold out our investment round, and those people were largely made up of our fans, our customers from around the restaurants,
Yep.
and a lot of them were people that really believed in what we were doing and where we were trying to take the brand. And so we at this stage we've raised, I think we've raised around $3 million in equity financing from our customers, and they've helped us grow into a national brand. And now I think one of the benefits that go beyond the capital is you develop a really unique relationship with some of your biggest fans, and you turn customers into evangelists. They're now screaming,
Thank you.
they're kind of, screaming your brand from the hills. And I think it's such a great exposure platform for us. And even beyond that, even beyond the, let's call it the branding or the marketing, I've developed some just absolutely tremendous relationships from an advisory standpoint with some of our customers and investors. People that have joined us and help us on the finance front, on the real estate front. We had Randy Zuckerberg reach out and invest in Citizens and has joined us in an advisory role also. So you start to discover some really unique customers and fans of yours, and they
Yes.
give you so much value beyond the simple dollars and cents.
Wow, that elevates the brand, that elevates your approach to the business. It's like, yeah, you just keep on going and the sky's the limit. But wow, what a testimonial to what you guys are doing to be able to do
Thank you.
that. And you can't have too many raving fans. And like you put it, evangelists. I love that term. That's the power of that is marketing in and of itself, which is kind of our next topic. What else do you do to market your business, and what marketing strategies have really paid off for you?
Yeah, for sure. And just one step backwards, Roger. I really the equity crowdfunding has been such a great journey for Citizens, and I'd really encourage, you know, young restaurant brands who want to grow and who are a little bit confused about what to do to really explore that avenue. There's some great equity crowdfunding platforms out there. They're so helpful. The platforms help you get going. And again, I'm super active on LinkedIn, on social media. So, I encourage people to reach out to me if they need any advice on that topic as well. And transitioning into the marketing front, Citizens, we've had a lot of success. I think we've got over 60,000 followers on our social media platforms. We're a young brand that's growing. One thing that's been, I think, really great for us is focusing from internal to external. And this is going to sound simple, but, making our food really, really beautiful and really highly presentable. What that's led to is our customers actively broadcasting our brand to their networks. We see a lot of our customers taking photos, posting on social media, standing on chairs. So I think, it sounds simple, but I think aesthetically really focusing on your restaurant and your product will transition into some really great, broadcasting and exposure to your customer base. And then I think another big key for us has been, really focusing on the influencer space. Social media is just such a key to the food and beverage space. It's only growing. And I think it's really taking a big chunk of what PR used to be to restaurants of the yesterday. Social media is playing that role today, or a
Question.
part of that role, I should say. And I think just focusing on that space, it's understanding what influencers or what kind of people value your restaurant and really love what you do, and inviting some of those folks to come in and try your restaurant, try your brand, and doubling down on that space. Once you find influencers that you like working with, that like working with you, I think, broadening your network there and having some kind of structure to allow them to work with you. And sometimes that means just inviting someone in for a great meal, on the brand, and having them promote and market you. So I think it's a simple answer, but I think really taking social media and the influencers' power, with great focus has been really effective for us at Citizens. So I think that's a big one. I think beyond that, we focus on what we call our LRM program, our local restaurant marketing program. So at Citizens, every one of our restaurants have an LRM champion. And what they do is they work with us in Mothership to understand what are the key neighborhood drivers in your neighborhood that drive your restaurant. So it could be the schools, it could be some of the commercial businesses, it could be a lot of the walk by traffic or the foot traffic, and really starting to tailor a unique, boots on the ground restaurant marketing strategy for that. So like one thing that I think we've been super successful at is developing great relationships with some of the schools around us and really catering to, great, to all the parents that are, parents in the community around that schools and catering to those folks. We deal with great, healthy and affordable all day breakfast and lunch and coffee. And so for us, that's a customer segment that's just a lot of synergy in. So I'd say social media and LRM are really, really big levers that we pull on.
Another system you got dialed. That's fantastic. Let me ask you, AI, are you using it in the restaurants and what are you doing with it?
That's a really good question. I think we're thinking about AI and we're learning about how to best use that in our business. Beyond, I think we're starting to use AI a little bit in marketing at the moment, Roger. So, I think where in the past there would be a significant investment in time and financial investment into designing social media posts or designing little brand assets, we use AI to really cover that gap now. So we can take simple photos. We're up there today taking some really great photos of some of the new sandwiches and menu items that we're bringing out in the next quarter. And I know that AI is going to play a really effective role in the editing and the beautifying of some of those photos and products as well. So we're using AI a ton in our marketing part of our business. And then there's, I think, some really exciting tools coming out within customer, guest reviews, reports, replying to some reviews that are base level. So I think we're starting to learn about it. I mean, this would be a good opportunity to ask, is there anything that you've seen that you're excited about to learn more about in AI?
Yeah, it's funny because I was just in Denver last week giving a presentation on basic AI. Nothing too technical, but I did a bunch of interviews to restaurants East Coast and out in the Denver area before I gave the presentation. And I'm finding that there's four key areas that are probably the simplest way to start. And it's menu engineering, it's inventory, it's marketing, as you mentioned, and it's also staff scheduling. And I actually put together a list of all the key platforms that are doing these things for restaurants right now and what the metrics are that they're claiming. What type of operational efficiencies will this do for you? What's the impact to the bottom line? So those four areas really. And to take that one step further, here in Maine, Portland, Maine, where I'm based, is a big restaurant. It's a big foodie city, and there's a lot of James Beard award-winning chefs and all this kind of stuff. They told me that their chef is using it mostly for recipe creation, and they're using a platform that literally, well, basically, if you feed your existing menu in, then AI gets to know what your ingredient lists are and what you're buying and cross-utilizing ingredients and all that kind of stuff. But then it's designing new menu items around what you're buying now, and it's maximizing, your efficiencies, your cost of goods. And if you dial in a target profit for the dish, it'll literally give you the recipe to dial in a profit and a cost of goods.
Wow.
So that's pretty extraordinary stuff. On the flip side, I was really surprised because one of my favorite restaurant groups in town, my wife and I go there for special occasions or anniversaries, super successful, 5 locations, higher end dining places. And I walked in wanting to talk to the general manager to ask about AI, and he wasn't on site. But one of the floor managers, who was a young person, said, well, our staff are really frustrated because we see all the efficiencies. Well, let's face it. I mean, younger people are really dialed into technology, right? And they're sort of disillusioned that the owner and the general manager of this restaurant group are like, we don't want anything to do with it. And it's like, what has always served us well will continue to serve us well. And the team across these restaurants, they see what could be possible and what it can do, and they just get the roadblock. So, every restaurant is
Wow.
different, but that's what I'm seeing. Those four things: menu engineering, inventory, marketing, and staff scheduling are probably the easiest places to start. And then, for those of our audience that are just, putting their feet in the water, really ChatGPT can do so much for you. You can literally ask ChatGPT any question. There's a free version, there's a paid version, but it's already gathering like any piece of information in the restaurant industry on best practices, on marketing, on this, that. You can ask it questions. You can come up with really inventive menu item names. We always had really cool item names for everything, like, the chocolate peanut butter blast and the raspberry cream disaster and the nachos avalanche. And it attracted attention to those things, and they sold themselves. But I go out to restaurants and they've got blueberry pie on the menu or chicken parmesan, and it's like, that's kind of boring. But you could ask it, and it'll give you a list of really cool names. So you can do so much with just the free Chat GPT. But, technology, I don't need to tell you, is changing every single minute. And there's certainly an intimidation factor out there. And there's kind of overwhelmed because there's so many platforms that do so many different things. And it's like a lot of people are saying, where do I start?
I love that advice, Roger. I think, even then I was taking notes as you were talking, because some of that, you just sprung my memory as well. Like we use ChatGPT to help us write SOPs, sometimes you'll feed into ChatGPT, your current SOP and ask it to give it more structure and professionalize it. And it will layer in some best standards or best practice from the industry. So I think it's just a huge amount of potential for our industry to help us get things done faster, more proficiently, more effectively. And so I'm excited. So I took those notes, and I plan on following up with you after the call.
Yeah, check it out. Maybe it'll serve you well. And interestingly, for any of our audience that would like the metrics behind any of these platforms and the things that I just suggested, if you email me, roger@restaurantrockstars.com, I'd be happy to send you the list of those platforms, what they do, how restaurants are using it, and what they claim the metrics to be in the bottom line performance. So many restaurants are really looking for direction. So I'm really glad we had this conversation. You guys are rocking and rolling, and surfing is huge in Australia. So I'm going to say that you guys are like, you've caught the wave and you're riding it to the beach in all those cities. You're doing a lot of things. I had a great conversation with you, and you added so much to our audience. Thanks for being a great guest on the show, Justin.
Thank you so much, Roger. Appreciate it, and look forward to continue surfing the wave, as you put it. And look forward to staying in touch. Thank you.
Fantastic. That was the Restaurant Rockstars podcast. Thanks to our audience for tuning in. We so appreciate you listening. Thanks to our sponsors this week for supporting our show. Can't wait to see you all in the next episode. Stay well, stay tuned, and I will see you in the next one. And that's a wrap. That was a lot of fun.
People go to restaurants for lots of reasons. For fun, celebration, for family, for lifestyle. What the customer doesn't know is the thousands of details it takes to run a great restaurant. This is a high-risk, high-fail business. It's hard to find great staff. Costs are rising and profits are disappearing. It's a treacherous road, and smart operators need a professional guide. I'm Roger. I've started many highly successful, high-profit restaurants. I'm passionate about helping other owners and managers not just succeed, but knock it out of the park. I created a game-changing system, and it's filled with everything I've learned in over 20 years running super profitable, super fun restaurants. Everything from creating high-profit menu items and cost controls to staff training where your teams serve and sell, to marketing hooks, money-maximizing tips, and efficiencies across your operation. What does this mean to you? More money to invest in your restaurant, to hire a management team, time freedom, and peace of mind. You don't just want to run a restaurant. You want to dominate your competition and create a lasting legacy. Join the Academy, and I'll show you how it's done.